Welcome to Part 5 of Sustainable Finance. In this chapter, we turn to sustainability reporting and ESG ratings, the plumbing of the whole field. Everything rests on a simple question. What does a company actually tell the world about its environmental and social performance, and can we believe it? This is topic 5 of 12, and it sits at the hinge of the course. We've looked at corporate social responsibility and how to measure it. Now we ask how that information gets disclosed, standardized, regulated, and scored. Over the next 5 videos, we'll build up from the basic idea of a sustainability report through the critique of reporting, the global standards, the EU's ambitious rulebook, and finally the contested world of ESG ratings. And if you like what you see here, subscribing to the channel means you won't miss any of the upcoming videos. Here's the map. Part 5, Sustainability Reporting and ESG Ratings. Sustainability Reporting and ESG Ratings comes after the foundational chapters on responsible investing and corporate social responsibility, and just before the big financial sectors, banking, insurance, investments, and asset management. Think of this chapter as the bridge. Before we can talk sensibly about a sustainable bank or a green fund, we need to understand where their sustainability data comes from and why two rating agencies can look at the same company and reach opposite conclusions. Here's what you should be able to do by the end of this chapter. First, distinguish the major voluntary reporting standards, the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, with its standards IFRS S1 and S2, and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. Second, navigate the EU regime. How the old NFRD became the CSRD and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the EU Taxonomy, the SFDR, and the CSDDD. Third, explain single versus double materiality. Fourth, critically assess the benefits and the limits of reporting. And finally, understand how ESG ratings are built, why they diverge, and how the EU now regulates the providers. 3 questions run through everything that follows. First, why do companies and investors bother with sustainability reporting at all? Second, what are the real advantages and disadvantages of the individual reporting standards? Because there are many, and they don't agree. And third, the sharpest one, can we trust ESG ratings, and why do the raters disagree so much? Hold on to that third question especially. By the end of the chapter, you'll understand why 2 respectable agencies can score the same firm as a leader and a laggard at once. Let's begin with Part A, the foundations of sustainability reporting. Before we judge the standards or the ratings, we need the basics. What a sustainability report actually is, why it has become so widespread, and what companies hope to get out of it. And then, having built the case for reporting, we'll turn around and examine a powerful critique of whether it's really working. So, what is sustainability reporting? At its core, it's companies communicating their performance and their impacts across a wide range of environmental, social, and governance topics, ESG for short. The goal is greater transparency, giving stakeholders insight into the risks and opportunities a firm faces that go beyond the financial bottom line. And already we meet a distinction that runs through the whole chapter. 2 complementary perspectives. Financial materiality asks how sustainability affects the firm's value. That's the outside-in view. Impact materiality asks how the firm affects society and the environment. That's the inside-out view. Keep both directions in your head. We'll build the whole regulatory debate on them. Why has reporting gone from niche to almost universal? Several forces push the same way. First, investor demand. ESG information is increasingly treated as decision useful, genuinely relevant to risk and valuation, not just public relations. Second, a regulatory push. Disclosure is shifting from voluntary to mandatory, especially in the EU. And the coverage numbers are striking. Around 90% of the world's largest companies now publish some form of sustainability or CSR sustainability, or CSR report. Notice finally a quiet but telling shift in language. We used to call this non-financial information. Increasingly, we call it sustainability information. And that change of word is itself an argument, signaling that these factors are, in fact, financially relevant. Let's get concrete, starting with the internal drivers, the reasons to do with running the business itself. Reporting can be a tool for holistic corporate steering, a way to manage the company across more than just financial figures. It supports compliance, making sure the firm meets current and upcoming regulation. It strengthens risk management, since a holistic overview gives a firmer basis for decisions. And it can drive efficiency and cost savings. Measuring makes decision-making sharper and helps cut waste across the supply chain. So even before any outsider looks at the report, the discipline of producing it can be valuable internally. Now the external drivers, the ones that face outward, toward markets and stakeholders. Reputation and trust come first. Transparency is a key way a business builds public confidence. Then access to capital. And this is more than a slogan. Firms that report tend to face fewer financing constraints. In the research, this shows up as lower Kaplan-Zingerlis index scores, a standard measure of how credit-constrained a company is. There's an employee dimension too. Better ESG transparency is associated with higher retention and loyalty. And finally, stakeholder communication. Timely, high-quality information lets a firm hold a faster dialogue with the market. So reporting is sold as good for the balance sheet, the workforce, and the reputation all at once. Now step back, because underneath all these drivers sits an implicit theory of change, a chain of assumptions the whole reporting movement rests on. It goes like this: what gets measured gets managed. So once firms measure ESG, their performance improves. A link then emerges between better sustainability records and better equity returns. Investors and consumers, armed with the data, reward the leaders and pressure the laggards. And the intended consequence at the end of the chain is a more sustainable form of capitalism. It's an elegant story, but a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Pucker, in a widely read 2021 Harvard Business Review piece, asks whether the evidence actually supports it. We'll spend the rest of this video finding out. But first, we have to nail down the single most important concept in all of reporting: materiality. Materiality is what decides which sustainability topics a company must report on. Materiality is what decides which sustainability topics a company must report on. It's the filter. Financial or outside in, materiality covers the matters that affect enterprise value. This is the focus of investors and of the ISSB. Impact or inside out. Materiality covers the company's own effects on people and planet. This is the focus of the GRI. Firms usually visualize the outcome as a materiality matrix, plotting how much stakeholders care about an issue against how much it affects the business. Where a topic scores high on both, it's material, and it makes the report. Here's where Europe makes its distinctive move. The EU's CSRD requires double materiality. A topic is material if it is financially material, or impact material, or both. Either direction is enough to trigger reporting. Outside in captures how sustainability risks and opportunities affect the company. Inside out captures how the company's activities affect people and the environment. Now contrast this with the global baseline. The ISSB under IFRS uses single financial materiality only. Single versus double, that's one of the deepest fault lines in the whole field. Europe says you must report your impact on the world even when it doesn't yet hit your bottom line. The global standard says report what affects enterprise value. Remember that difference. It comes back repeatedly. Here's what a materiality matrix actually looks like in the wild. This is Nestle's from their Creating Shared Value report. On the vertical axis, the degree of stakeholder concern. On the horizontal axis, the impact on the business. Every sustainability topic gets placed somewhere on this grid, and the issues in the top right corner, high on both, are treated as most material and given prominence in the report. It's a simple, visual way to justify what's in and what's out. But keep a critical eye on it. The company itself chooses where each dot goes. So, is reporting actually working? Here, Pucker delivers a bracing verdict. The impact of the whole measurement and reporting movement has, in his words, been oversold. Consider the track record. Over roughly 2 decades in which reporting and sustainable investing boomed, carbon emissions kept rising and environmental damage accelerated. Social inequity increased too. The CEO to worker pay gap in the United States actually widened, even after disclosing that very ratio became mandatory. The uncomfortable lesson: reporting is not a proxy for progress. Over the next 5 slides, Pucker lays out 5 problems that explain why. Let's take them one at a time. Problem 1. For most of this history, there were no real mandates and little assurance. Companies had wide discretion over which standard to follow and what to include. So while around 90% of the largest companies produce CSR reports, only a minority are validated by a third party. The result is predictable. A lot of the underlying data is incomplete or simply misleading, and nobody independent has checked it. The good news is that this is exactly the gap the EU's CSRD now closes. It makes assurance mandatory, starting with limited assurance and moving over time toward the stricter standard of reasonable assurance. Problem 2. Measurement itself is non-standard. It's often incomplete, imprecise, and hard to compare across firms. Even simple metrics cause confusion because consumers have no intuitive reference point. Pucker's example is wonderful. The water footprint of a single liter of Coca-Cola. The company's own estimates ranged from under 2 liters of water to around 70 liters, depending purely on the methodology chosen. This is one product, one company, measuring one thing. And the answer spans a factor of 35, just from methodological choices. If a firm's own estimates swing that wildly, what hope does an outsider have of comparing 2 different firms? Problem 3. Specious targets. Most companies set their sustainability goals based on their own capabilities or ambitions, what they feel able to promise, rather than on the actual ecological limits of the planet. The numbers are sobering. In a 2016 study, only around 5% of reporting companies even mentioned the ecological limits that constrain economic growth. Fewer than 1% set environmental goals genuinely aligned with planetary boundaries. Since then, science-based targets, through the Science-Based Targets Initiative, have spread, which is real progress. But many targets remain aspirational, nice round numbers for a distant year without a credible path or a grounding in what the science requires. Problem 4 is one you'll meet again and again: Scope 3 and supply chains. A complete carbon picture needs 3 scopes. Scope 1 is direct emissions from a company's own facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from the electricity it purchases. And Scope 3 is everything else, all the other upstream and downstream emissions: suppliers, distribution, business travel, and the use of the products once sold. For most companies, Scope 3 is by far the largest slice and the hardest to measure because supply chains are multi-tiered and outsourced. According to the CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, fewer than half of the companies that disclose actually track and report their Scope 3 at all. And problem 5. The information is simply confusing. CSR reports are often long, dense, and bewildering for the very audiences they're meant to inform. And many metrics have no intuitive reference point. There's a darker edge too. Headlines trumpeting a new disclosure. Milestone can amount to greenwashing, the appearance of progress substituting for the substance. Underneath all 5 problems runs one theme: comparability across firms and over time remains weak. And that weakness is precisely the motivation for the rest of this chapter. The drive to set standards in parts B and C and to build standards in parts B and C and to build ratings in part D. Before we move on, let's ground the critique in the academic evidence, because this isn't just one commentator's opinion. A whole literature asks how reliable CSR reports and ratings really are. For a comprehensive categorization of the many third-party CSR measures, see Diaz-Canamero and co-authors, 2020. On methodological differences between rating agencies, Sadawi and Subaroyen, 2018. On the trustworthiness of the ratings, Chatterjee, Levine and Toffel, 2009. And of the reports, Lock and Seal, 2016, and Ditlev-Simonson, 2014. And on whether ratings and reports even reach the same conclusions, Scalet and Kelly, 2010. Spoiler, often they don't. We'll return to that in Part D. Let's recap. Sustainability reporting is how companies disclose their ESG performance, driven by internal motives, steering, compliance, risk, efficiency, and external ones, reputation, capital, employees, communication. The concept that governs it all is materiality, and we drew the sharp line between single financial materiality and the EU's double materiality. Then we turned critical. With Pucker, we saw that reporting has arguably been oversold, and we walked through his 5 problems: weak mandates and assurance, non-standard measurement, specious targets, the Scope 3 blind spot, and sheer confusion. The common thread is poor comparability. In the next video, we take up the response to that problem, the reporting standards and frameworks that try to bring order to the alphabet soup, GRI, the ISSB, the TCFD, and more. See you there. That's it for this one. Thanks so much for your attention. If you enjoyed it, a subscribe would mean a lot, and it keeps you posted on what's next.